Sometimes a person's fate changes with nothing more than a single hand raised in the air. But what if that hand belongs to a man whose past is written in blood? Emilia Stein could barely even remember her own name anymore, shaking with fear and sweat. Her hair was a mess, her thin body trembling in her torn dress like a leaf in the wind. Today, she was going to be sold. It wasn't even really an auction. No one remembered she was a human being. She was just the price of a debt, just something to be valued. The platform was made of wood, held together with a few nails. The crowd below stared at her, some whistling mockingly, some looking at her like she was an animal. Booze, sweat, and filth. All of it seemed to sink right into Emilia's lungs. 25, someone shouted. 30, came another call. She couldn't look toward the voices. She kept her eyes on her shoes. Because for the women, if you made eye contact, you were sold off even quicker. Emilia was just 18, and that day, her father's gambling debt had put her up on the auction block. 35, came another voice. For a moment, the crowd went silent. That voice belonged to Eric Wendell, the cruelest man in town. He owned the trade, owned people's bodies. He bought, used, broke, and then tossed them aside. Emilia closed her eyes. Everyone knew Eric would win. Everyone thought that would be her last day. But then, something happened. Just as the auction was about to end, the room fell into a deep silence. Then, from the very back row, a hand went up. No one looked that way, because no one ever sat there. That corner was full of dust and shadows. But that hand, it was there, just a simple hand. Fingers cracked, covered in scars, darkened from years of labor. But it was steady, like it stood for a decision. And that decision was about to change everything. 50, the man said. Just one word. Thick, tired, almost rusty voice. The whole place froze. The auctioneer swallowed hard. Sir, your name. No answer. Just a figure, face still in shadow, slowly stood up. A big, strong farmer. His eyes were gray, harsh, but somewhere inside, something that had once glowed with love was still burning beneath the ashes. His name was Matteo Brandt. And until that moment, nobody thought he'd ever stand up for another person again. Eric Wendell jumped to his feet. This is nonsense, he yelled. He's nothing. A rat lost in the dirt. You dare challenge me? But Matteo didn't answer. He just took one step forward, stepped out of the shadows. And at that moment, everyone noticed he didn't have a weapon in his hand, because that man had brought something else. Real courage. That night, even the wind seemed to disappear. It was like nature itself was trying to process what had happened. Emilia still couldn't really understand what was going on. The torn cloak thrown over her shoulders felt more valuable than the $50 in the leather pouch in her hand. Because, for the first time, someone had spent money not to own her, but to set her free. But why? Matteo didn't say a word. Riding double on the horse, he just gave short instructions. Hold on. Duck. Don't close your eyes. But Emilia didn't close her eyes. In fact, she opened them wider than ever. Why had this man saved her? Why would a quiet farmer risk his life for someone he didn't even know? And more than anything, what was Matteo hiding? By the time they reached the cabin, the middle of the night had already passed. Only a faint blue glimmered on the horizon. Matteo tied up the horse. He led Emilia inside, quietly. The place was simple. A wooden table, a small stove, a dirt floor. But everything was clean. The room was full of silence. You'll stay here, the man said. You're safe. Emilia lifted her head. Her eyes held both gratitude and anger. You don't know my name. You don't know my past. Why did you save me? Matteo turned to the window. He looked out for a while. Then he spoke, softly. Because I saw you. What does that mean? Not just on the platform, he said. I saw myself in you. Emilia flinched, but she listened quietly. I had a daughter, too. She was 18. His gaze drifted off. He gripped the cup in his hands. His voice cracked. And she, when no one helped, was sold. A shiver ran through Emilia. What happened to her? I was too late. Matteo didn't say more. He didn't have to. The pain came through in the silence between his words. Emilia whispered, What about now? Now, Matteo said. I live so I'll never be too late again. That night, for the first time, Emilia didn't cry. Because tears didn't help anymore. Instead, a determined silence filled her. But outside, another kind of silence was forming. In the dark corners of town, Eric Wendell was struggling to contain his rage. Who is this farmer? He demanded of his men. Where did he come from? Why did he show up now? The man next to him, tall and unshaven, replied, Matteo Brandt. He lost his family in a raid years ago. Hasn't spoken since. Just buries himself in the land. Never leaves the farm. Eric slammed his drink down on the table. That man humiliated me in front of everyone. This was supposed to be an auction, not a disgrace. Then he went quiet. He smiled. But it wasn't a smile, it was a threat. If he bought that girl, he'll pay for it. Not with money, with blood. Meanwhile, Emilia curled up in bed, staring out through the foggy window. She heard a sound, a creak in the wind. A chill ran through her. Maybe what she thought was freedom was only a pause. What if Eric wouldn't give up? When morning came, the cabin was surrounded by silence. There were no birds singing. Even the wind seemed to have forgotten which way to blow. Emilia was sitting by the small window. She was holding her mug with both hands, but she just let the tea go cold. She had barely slept that night. At first light, Matteo had gone outside without saying a word and saddled his horse. It was like he sensed what was coming. His eyes were fixed on the distant woods, like he was waiting for someone. Or something. Emilia stood up. She walked after him and called out, Last night, there was someone around the cabin. I'm not making it up. Matteo didn't turn his head. Yeah, there was. That answer sent a chill through Emilia. You knew? I saw the tracks. They went as far as the back slope, but didn't come any closer. Who was it? Finally, Matteo turned around. There wasn't tiredness in his eyes, just habit. The look of a man who had seen things like this too many times before. One of Eric's scouts. His name's Carl. He's quiet. If he's ordered to do something, he'll do it without blinking. Emilia's voice trembled. What about tonight? Matteo shrugged. Tonight, more will come. We have to be ready. Do you have a gun? No. So, how will we fight? This time Matteo looked straight at Emilia. Sometimes, to fight, you don't need a weapon. Determination is enough. At that same moment, Eric Wendell was standing over a map. He was pointing at a hill with his finger. 3 men were with him. Carl was silent. The other 2 were laughing. It ends tonight, Eric said. That farmer humiliated me in front of everyone. Now all those eyes are watching to see what we do. One of his men asked, What about the girl? Eric smiled. I want her alive. Because with her, it's not just about paying off a debt. It's about rebuilding fear. Emilia was alone in the cabin. Matteo had gone up the hill to set some traps. But before leaving, he had left her a small pouch. Use this. If you need to, he'd said. Emilia opened the pouch. Inside, there was an old letter, a rusty medallion, and a torn piece of cloth. At first, she didn't understand. But then she started reading the letter carefully. Dear officer, we fought together at Fort Belridge. Your word was sharper than your sword, your presence steadier than the commander's. After you lost your daughter, we thought you'd never come back. But I always knew one day you'd save someone's life again. And if this letter is ever opened, I hope it means you came back for the right person. Signed, J. Beckett, 3rd Cavalry Battalion. Emilia covered her mouth with her hands. He was an officer? A soldier? Matteo's past was no longer a secret. He wasn't just a quiet farmer. He was a man who'd commanded in battle. After he lost his daughter, he'd walked away from everything. And now, he had come back for her. When night fell, everything was quieter than it should have been. Emilia looked out the window and saw the first shadow, then the second, then the sound of a whistle, a certain rhythm, like a military call. That was when she understood. The attack was about to begin. When Matteo came back to the cabin, he was sweating. There are tracks on the ground. They're close. Let's run, Emilia pleaded. Please, let's go. But Matteo shook his head. If we run, then the next girl's fate will be sold off. Emilia lowered her head. She didn't cry. She just made a decision. She took the letter out of the pouch and handed the medallion to Matteo. Stop hiding. Stop being silent. And right then, the farmer straightened his back. As if, after all these years, the soldier inside him could finally breathe again. Night had fallen, but the darkness didn't just cover the sky. It seemed to seep under the ground, behind the trees, soaking into the cabin walls. It was like even the air was waiting for something to break. Emilia was holding the small knife by the stove. Her palm was sweaty, but she was determined. She had memorized the circular trap lines Matteo had carved into the cabin floor. Every step was a choice. Every silence, a possibility. Then footsteps came from outside. It wasn't just one person. At least 4. maybe 5. They were moving low in the dark. Not like soldiers, like hunters. And this time the prey wasn't just Matteo. Emilia was a target too. Matteo was at the window. He had an old rifle in his hands. He was ready, but his finger hadn't touched the trigger. Not yet. If one of those kids turns right, he whispered, the trap will go off. Emilia asked, do you think he will? One of Eric's men. Carl. He acts on instinct, not logic. And right then came a snap. The right turn. The trap went off. The hidden barbed wire wrapped around his ankle. Then a sharp bolt shot down from the pine branches. Carl screamed. That panicked the others. But Eric wasn't inside, because he'd handed the lead to someone else. A surprise figure. Someone else was approaching from behind the cabin. Slow, quiet, like death itself. Matteo noticed something. That sound. It's familiar. A shadow appeared at the foot of the door. Then the door was knocked, but not with a bang. Knock, knock, pause, knock. 3 short, 1 long. Emilia asked, what is that? Matteo's eyes widened. That's a code. He opened the door. Standing there was a man he'd thought was dead for years. Johann Becker, the friend who'd fought beside Matteo in the war. His face was covered with scars. His eyes were still as alert as they'd been in the trenches. And his hands were still ready to shoot. You don't have time, Johann said. Eric's coming to erase you, but I still count you as a debt. You owed me nothing, said Matteo. I chose, not you. Johann came inside. But you saved my sister. Now I'll save yours. Emilia flinched. I'm not his daughter. Johann looked her in the eyes. No, but someone loved her like a daughter. And that is enough. That night, the attack came. But there was something they hadn't expected. 2 men, 1 girl, and a conscience. Triggers were pulled, but not in vain. Every bullet fired had a purpose. While Emilia gave first aid to a man lying by the window, she saw blood for the first time, but she didn't run. She wasn't afraid, because fear was like an old shirt now. She had taken it off. At one point, Matteo went down. A bullet grazed his shoulder. One of Eric's men aimed at the cabin. At that exact moment, Emilia threw the knife. It was the first time she'd ever held a weapon. But her aim was true. The man dropped to the ground. As he writhed in pain, the only words that came out were, was that a girl? Yes, it was a girl. But she wasn't a victim anymore. She was someone who decided, acted, wanted to live. And in the darkness, Emilia whispered, I'm not anyone's debt anymore. The next morning, the chaos in front of the cabin had given way to a silent exhaustion. The men caught in the traps had either run away or left the cabin wounded. But that didn't mean everything was over. On the contrary, the real storm was just approaching. Matteo's shoulder was bandaged. Johann was keeping watch outside. And inside, Emilia was frozen, staring at a piece of paper. The paper was old, a torn notebook page. The ink was smeared, but still readable. Signed transfer document, Montgomery, R. 1 woman, 3 men, Tunnel 9, North Mine Site, below, Eric Wendell's stamp. And in the margin, a note. Debt exchanged. Future collateral, Clara. Emilia's hands trembled. That's my father's name, she said. Robert Montgomery. Matteo looked up. What does it mean? What's written on that document? Emilia swallowed. My father sold people to pay off his debts. A silence filled the room. Even the fire in the stove seemed to shrink. Because some truths can extinguish even the deepest warmth inside a person. Emilia stood up. Her knees were shaking, but she didn't fall. It was like, for the first time, she truly felt the weight of the name she'd been carrying for years. I was the price of a life. Collateral for a debt. It wasn't for nothing that I was bought. Matteo bowed his head. It's not your fault. No, Emilia said. But I'm the one living with the consequences. At the same time, Eric Wendell was making preparations at an abandoned station outside town. This time, the plan was different. An open fight won't work, he was telling his men. This time we scare the townsfolk. We target the children, not the cabin. One of his men stepped forward, nervous. Isn't that too much? Eric turned. If the fear is big enough, the people won't choose justice, they'll choose obedience. By late afternoon, someone was approaching the cabin. Alone. No weapon in their hands. But there was another weapon in their eyes, knowledge. They came to the door. Knocked quietly. Emilia opened it. She didn't recognize the woman in front of her. But the woman spoke directly. I'm your mother's sister. My name is Teresa. Emilia was stunned. My mother. She's dead. Teresa lowered her head. Yes, but I can't let you leave without knowing some things. She pulled a yellowed letter from her pocket and handed it to Emilia. If you are reading these lines, it means I wasn't strong enough to protect you. Don't blame your father. He was just a man who got dirty trying to survive. But you can be something else. You are my rewritten destiny. Your mother, Maria. Tears ran down Emilia's cheeks. But this time, it wasn't from pain. Because for the first time, she felt like someone saw her not as a debt, but as an inheritance. As night fell, Johan came in. We have 1 hour. Eric is planning to kidnap the children in town. Since he couldn't finish it at the cabin, now he wants to make your name a symbol of fear in everyone's hearts. Emilia looked up. I'll go. Matteo cried out. No, this is my past. No one can erase what my father did. But if I save someone, maybe that's a beginning. Matteo fell to his knees. I lost my own daughter. I can't watch it happen again. Emilia bent down. She put her hands on his shoulders. You lost your daughter. But now I'm finding myself. And at that moment, for the first time, Matteo called Emilia not Clara but Emma. Because now that girl wasn't just the shadow of the past. She was someone who was starting to write the meaning of her own name. The town school building was dim. Outside, the wind was howling. And inside, the children were trying to breathe as quietly as possible. Tables and chairs had been piled up against the windows, and Miss Henderson had lined up the children one by one along the wall. But the silence inside was pregnant with the noise outside. Because down the street, Eric Wendell was stepping out of the darkness. 2 men were with him. They didn't have guns in their hands, but chains. For them, this was a show now. A show of fear. Matteo's not here, one of them said. The girl is alone. Eric smiled. Just the way I wanted. But just then, the school door opened, and in came someone with a long shadow but a light step. Emilia, an old hat on her head, Johan's rusty pistol in her hand. In her eyes, not surrender, but determination. You came? Eric said. Just like your father. Emilia took another step forward. My father isn't here with me, but I'll pay his debt. I'll erase his cowardice. With my courage. Eric laughed. With courage? You're going to save them all with a pistol? Emilia stayed quiet. Then she stared straight at Eric. No, with the truth. And right then she pulled out an old envelope from her jacket. Inside were written confessions signed by Eric himself about the captive workers. Did you forget the deaths at the mine? Emilia said. This signature is yours. And now, the whole town is going to know. Eric's face tightened. Where did you get those documents? Emilia lifted her chin. A woman's silence is sometimes louder than a courtroom scream. At that moment, the side door of the school opened. Johan came in. Then Matteo. Eric was alone now. His men had pulled back. The townspeople came out of the crowd, surrounding him with guns in their hands. Sheriff Morrison stood at the front. We were afraid of you for years, he said. But today, we're freed by a girl's resolve. Eric reached for his weapon, but it was too late. Johan took his arm out in a single move. Emilia stepped forward and looked Eric in the eyes. Years ago, when my father signed to sell me, I thought I was just a burden. But now I know, I'm not a burden. I'm an awakening. As Sheriff Morrison snapped the cuffs on Eric's wrist, Emilia had the last word, and now no one will ever be forced into silence again. Days passed. Now, the mornings didn't start with silence, but with cheerful voices around the breakfast table. Every morning, Emilia asked Matteo a question, and every evening, she'd fall asleep with her head on his shoulder. And every day, Matteo was learning a little more how to be a father. Their bond was built on fragile trust, the kind that's hard to form, but impossible to break once it's there. The town had changed. Hope had replaced fear. And above the door of the old schoolhouse, a new sign was hung, Emma Blackwood Community House, from silence to strength. But the story didn't end there. One evening, Emilia found an old box. Inside was her mother's journal. On the last page, there was just one sentence. Sometimes, it's not a girl's name, but her voice that changes the world. And Emma smiled, because now, she had both a name and a voice.